Hello, nice to meet you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So the purpose of having this chat is to, I think, for all the landscape architects or people with similar design, build industry background, want to know more about how people with a similar expertise or skills could transfer their skills or soft skills or how to develop their own personal passion. So I think your journey might could inspire some people with a similar background. If you don't mind, could you simply introduce yourself, your name, places you travel to, types of business now, you startup, design agency, or you work for corporate, and what's your main project focus now?
Sure. Happy to share what I've been working on. So, hello, everybody. My name's Sean. I'm primarily working in Australia. I have worked elsewhere in the past as an urban designer, but not as a service designer, which is what I've been primarily focused on the last few years. Over the last few years, I've worked across startups in corporate as a contractor freelancing. So I've covered quite a few of the options that you might face, and I can talk about those. Currently, what I'm working on is I've started my own business. It is not in service design, but I've used a lot of the things that I've learned through my service design journey to setting up this business. What I'm building is basically a talent marketplace, but instead of selling your own skills and experience, you would be selling the connections that you have. So it's been a slow start, I won't lie, but momentum is starting to build. So fingers crossed it keeps going.
Oh, that's fantastic. I feel like you've been starting with the very technical parts, talking about the terminology jargons in the industry and slowly transitioning to a bigger networking wise, connecting people with, it's more, I think it's like Web 3.0. It's you connecting them to the startup instead of you need to bulky purchasing the whole thing. I think it's really good. You are selling the point. And I know that now they are selling the game coins through all the platforms. So it's like a liquidation, everyone's values. Yeah, it's really great.
We'll see how it pans out.
All right. Maybe I ask you next question. So what led you to transition from landscape design or urban design to service design?
The short answer is just for full context, I studied landscape architecture and urban planning, and I didn't practice either of those things. I practiced as an urban designer. I really enjoyed the theory that I studied. What I really did not enjoy the actual practice, like the doing of the job. I found as an urban designer, there wasn't really much areas of influence that I could have, because at the end of the day, the bulk of the work that gets done as an urban designer is you are representing someone either at a tribunal or at a panel. And as a consequence, you are then forced to represent the views of whoever is paying you. And on the opposite side of the table would also be an urban designer who is forced to represent the counter argument. So you might both have particular views about why something is good or bad urban design, and you might have the evidence to back it up, but ultimately you don't get to truly verbalize what you might think and feel. And I found that really frustrating. I wanted to do something else with my life, and I stumbled across the field of service design. If you don't know what that is, I'm sure we can talk about that more in detail later on. But I knew I had to make a change. I was having like a mental health crisis being an urban designer, and basically within 3 days of me finding out about service design, I jumped ship. I quit my job, and I was like, I need to get out and I need to do this, whatever this is. And that's what I did.
Wow. It's a sharp transition. I know it's like a diving. So may I ask what age or maybe how many years after graduation that you start think about that and having mental crisis and finally made decision? How long is the period, that the dark age?
Dark age. The dark age was probably 3 or 4 years long. It was a long time. And that was spread over working for public sector and private. So I thought, oh, maybe if I go to the other one, it'll be different, but no, it wasn't the case. So I tried it and it didn't work out for me. And so it was, when did I graduate? So it was probably about 4 years after I graduated that was when this sort of stuff started going, okay, I've given it some time now. Clearly, I'm not enjoying this. Let me try something else. Tried that and was still not enjoying it and decided, you know what? I'm just sitting here wasting my time and my energy and my life, and there's better things to do with that.
I totally agree. I think this definitely be I think the same feeling most people have when they enter the year 3, year 4 of their postgraduate style, like a work. Heard many people or colleagues telling me the same feeling. Until I think from my experience, what you did is you go through all the sectors you can in this industry, the public sector, private sector, and see it's the same gig. And once you figure out, it's just like, hell no, yes. It's like, I just go to what I really like and do that. Wow, it's great. Oh, thank you for sharing that. So maybe we
Absolutely.
jump to what you've been doing. So what is like working in service design? And I give you a few questions. How does working in service design differ from your previous design experience? And what were the biggest challenges we mentioned that in the career switch. So what are some key cultural or professional difference in the service design industry in Australia compared to other markets? I may feel free to answer, not like or provide some similar topics. And so far, can you share a memorable experience from your career so far?
Yeah, sure. We'll start from the top. How service design differs from urban design work. In urban design, you're pretty confined by how you're meant to do things. There's a specific framework of what kind of job happens at what kind of stage. And
Okay.
you could be, for example, we're based in Victoria. So
Mhm.
this is going to be from the Victorian Australian context. There's state level planning policy that says you need to do X, Y, and Z. And then there is council level planning policy that says you need to do X, Y, and Z. And you just have to follow that, right? You can't break out of that to try and do something different 99% of the time. Even if whatever it is you're designing for on a site by site basis is going to be different, the process that you go through is going to be the same. You are going to need to do an urban design framework here. You are going to need to do a structure plan here. You are going to need to go to a panel here, and you're going to need to go to tribunal at this stage, and that's what you do. With
Oh,
service design, the biggest mental switch to make
mhm.
is the answer for any service design question is always, it depends.
Oh, wow.
So you have to be comfortable understanding that there's no set boundaries. Things can be as big or as small as you want to make them. And you need to figure out, if I don't know what the boundaries are, how do I go about establishing boundaries for myself to figure out the best way to solve whatever this problem is? And I think for a lot of architects, landscape architects, urban designers, I may be generalizing here, but at
Mhm.
least from my experience historically, there's two things that designers absolutely love. One is if they have zero constraints, and the other is if they have lots of constraints and it's a massive puzzle to try and solve. And those are the two most interesting pieces of work. And in service design, you get to figure out which of those paths you get to go down for every single project. In an ideal situation. So it's not like you're presented with a specific site and these boundaries, and this is just what you have to deal with. You get to choose whether you're only going to focus on one thing or you're going to focus on the whole thing. And you can make your case to your stakeholders that you need to do one or the other or everything in between. The biggest challenges in making the career switch, the first was believing that I could do it. I was I said, I was not in a very mentally healthy place when I made the transition. And when I first did it, I was thinking, am I just doing this out of desperation? Or am I doing this because I believe that my skills and my experience from my past life can translate into this new one? And there was a lot of self doubt for several months. But as I met more and more people in the service design industry, that sort of faded away. The conversations that I would have with people convinced me to believe in myself that, yes, I can do this and this is where my skills and experience belong. I would say another challenge that someone who's transitioning now will face versus when I transition, which is many years ago now, is where the demand for service designers is in the economy. I'd say there was not so much. I'd say there was more demand compared to supply of service designers back then. Then there's more service design jobs now, but there's also more service designers now. And so there's more competition for roles. So if you're thinking about it, that's just something to keep in mind. The same goes for if you're looking at UX design, product design as well, if that's on a whole extra level of extreme in terms of the number of people who are doing that. Your next question was around cultural and professional differences. I can't really speak to that. I haven't worked
Uh-huh.
in other countries in service design. I've done some contract work for clients in the US, and service design in the US compared to here is surprisingly a lot less mature. There's not really a culture or a practice of service design over there. There, there are people who do it, but it's really fragmented. Whereas here in Australia, there is a pretty large informal community and a lot of people know a lot of the other people. And the contract work that I did was super interesting because it's generally speaking, when you work in the tech industry, if you're outside the US, you look to the US for how things are done right now. And I would count myself as a tech industry professional nowadays. And when I was dealing with my client, who was a US based tech industry professional, and I was explaining to him, these are the things we're going to do, and this is why we're going to do them, and this is what we hope to uncover, his mind was constantly blown. And I found that really fascinating. But hey, it got the outcome we wanted. And relatively speaking, I was cheap labor for someone in the US. It all worked out in the end. All right, your final question. Memorable experience from my career so far. I've had a few. Chenyi, you and I worked alongside one another on some interesting pieces of some interesting large infrastructure projects, and me coming from the service and experience design aspect of it.
Uh-huh.
I'd say maybe I'll use that as the example because, so for context, we worked together on some large rail transport infrastructure projects. And some of the work that I did with the team that I was part of was doing a lot of interviews with people who had accessibility needs, various kinds, whether that means they are wheelchair users or they're vision impaired or hearing impaired, um, and chatting to them about how they use public transport and how they might go about using uh, some of the new infrastructure that was getting designed and potentially built. Now, one thing that really stood out to me was there was a proposed station design where the disabled pickup and drop off parking space was about 70 meters or so from the station entrance. And we showed this to someone who's a wheelchair user, and we talked them through, so this is how you would get to the station and this is where the drop off space is. And they looked at that and they said, that's bullshit. I can only move about 10 meters on my own at a time before I need to take a break. You're telling me I need to take 7 breaks before I get to the station. Entrance. And then how far is it from the entrance to the train? So about another 70 meters. And then I need to take 15 breaks from when I get dropped off to when I get on the train. That's impossible. And we don't tend to hear these kinds of stories when we're designing as a landscape architect or an architect. We might host community engagement sessions, but we only hear the voices of people who turn up. We don't go out to seek the voices of people who may be affected at an edge case and who need to be accounted for. And just listening to that and having the evidence that someone in that position couldn't use the design, we were able to change some parts of the design as a result, which was amazing. We can actually do better for people in this way. That was for being able to showcase that there's value in the way we are trying to do things and how we ask questions and the evidence that we provide and how that ends up being a better building if you're thinking about it being a building, and a better public transport service if you're thinking about it being a service. I'd say that's one that comes to mind. I've got a bunch of others. If you need more examples, let me know.
This really reminded me of the back from the years. I think it's almost 4 or 5 years ago.
4 years now.
But it's pretty intense. Yeah, I remember I read you and then the other person's report regarding the region around the airport precinct and how you get interviews and summarize the key factors. And like you mentioned, it's very interesting because I went to many of the old stations around eastern suburbs, and I figured out why there are so many stops. I was trying to using a scooter to save my time, but all the stops make me sick. And we mentioned someone needs to take 15 breaks to get into a station, but in the same time, it's not breaking any landscape architect DDA standards, national building codes. So it's rational, but it's not reasonable. So it can stay at the same time, especially when I go to Western suburb and viewing some of the newly built projects. They are even expanding longer. It's, I think, 10 bricks or 8 bricks. So I feel like it's a merit for even older projects where they don't really have a lot of constraints, but they consider that even with a little bit higher ratio. But in some of the newly projects, they have all DDA friendly, but they actually worsen the experience. So I start thinking about what really make a difference. Is it the better material, a thicker concrete, or it's the journey that actually have merit? Yeah, thank you for sharing. I didn't know this specific aspect. Most time we're thinking about the DDA drainage and ventilation. It's all about safety, but they really think about who's really be using that. I think you give us a would be different perspective, but profoundly. Thank you, Sean. Actually, I have a question, if you don't mind
Sure.
asking, because you mentioned the transitioning. So many people ask me this one question is they don't show what's the transferable skill from the build industry to a new area like UX, UI, or service design, or what's something that they need to harness before thinking about transitioning, even soft skills. What do you suggest from your personal experience?
So my circumstance is probably a little bit unique because when I was working in the public sector, I had the opportunity to do a bunch of things outside of my urban design practice. And that enabled me to work on technology implementation across multiple departments, which got me thinking, oh, this is a job. How do I do this job? I know I can do this job. What is this job? It's called service design. And I went off and did that. So I'd say the most transferable skill is curiosity is harder than people think it is to cultivate. And generally speaking, most of the architects and landscape architects that I met are relatively curious people. They want to figure out how to solve a problem at the end of the day, right? If you give them a site, they look at it like a puzzle and go, oh, how do I solve this puzzle? How do I make the best building on this piece of land or have the nicest landscape on this piece of land with all of the compliance requirements and all of that. And keeping that curiosity is probably the best thing for you. I wouldn't say like hard skills are not super translatable. Soft skills like client management, stakeholder management, understanding what it is you're building for, who you're building for, those are all key. But curiosity, I say, is number one. Because if you're curious, you won't stop learning. And if you don't stop
Oh,
learning, you'll figure it all out.
right. And I think that's the core energy that you make you move every day to the place you want to. Right. That's definitely something people start thinking about what's really triggered them to wake up and every day and definitely what. Yeah.
Actually,
Oh,
yeah, I was
I
going to
know.
say question
Yeah, yeah.
3.1 is because I work for myself, maybe it's not super relevant. So I don't know if you want to skip that one.
Maybe
Yeah,
you can briefly saying where you work for corporate, where you work for
yeah, sure.
what's.
Okay. Typical day in the life. Working in a corporate, we usually have something called a stand up. If you know what a stand up is, great. If not, I'll give you a quick rundown. A stand up is basically a short session first thing in the morning to go over what it is you've done, what it is you're doing, and if there's anything that you need help with and you share with the team. And that's it. You don't talk about anything else besides that. All of the if there's a problem or you need to have a direct conversation with someone, you take that outside of stand up. It's just to get work going. And then as a service designer, man, 90% of the job really is dealing with your stakeholders. It's a lot of meetings with all of your stakeholders to try and get them moving in the same direction, and a lot of fact finding as well. Because if you're in a business where there's
Mhm.
30,000 people,
Yeah.
everybody's going to know a little bit about something, but nobody's going to know everything about everything. So you're going to have to go do some digging with a lot of different people. And a lot of time is spent doing that. I'd say that's the general course of a week, depending on what stage of the project that you're at, which I guess I can then answer your next question about the service design
Mhm.
process and time
Yeah.
and effort. Which part of the service design process takes the most time and effort? I
Yeah.
would say what takes the most amount of time is actually delivering a piece of work. I think in the same way that it would be with anything built environment related, you
Mhm.
can go out on site a couple of times, do your analysis, and pulling together a design that works for people is a bit of a process. And then the actual drafting and technical drawing side of things, that part takes time. And it's a similar sort of thing with service design. So to give people a breakdown of the basic design process that
Mhm.
everybody uses, there's a method from the British Design Council called the double diamond process, which you may or may not have heard of, but it ends up getting misimplemented quite a lot by a lot of people. There's two diamonds. The first diamond is your exploratory phase, and the second diamond is your delivery phase. Why they're diamonds is because you're diverging your activity and then converging the activity twice over. So the first time round, you're exploring and trying to define what the problem actually is. Like I said earlier, the answer to everything is it depends, right? So the problem can be a whole bunch of things, and you need to do your work to figure out what the problem is. Then you start narrowing down what the problem is, and the midpoint between the two diamonds is okay, now we know what the problem is. How do we design a solution? So you would then explore a bunch of different design solutions and then converge again and finalize your design solution. That's basically the short version of the double diamond, but there's a lot of literature associated with it that highly worth reading into. The longest part is the second half of the second diamond, because let's say you're working in a corporate environment, you're going to be in an organization of 5,000, 10,000, 30,000 people, 35,000 in my case. And something that would be simple for a company of 20 people is a massive thing to organize, like even a department of 200 people around. And it's a lot of meetings with a lot of people a lot of the time to get everybody on the same side and delivering the same thing. That would take the longest, I would say. It's also, for me personally, it's the least fun process as well.
30,000. I could imagine how you organize your work of talking and summarizing.
A lot of talking. I'd say, no, I disagree. It's not a lot of talking. It's a lot of facility. Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Because ultimately, you will have an outcome that you want to achieve, and you need to facilitate the discussion so that everybody comes to that outcome more or less of their own accord, right? So you want to be able to build a case convincingly enough and hold a discussion where everybody talks through their problems, and through that process of your facilitated discussion or workshop, whatever it might be, that they agree that's the direction that we need to head, and we understand exactly why.
That's much different than facilitation. And you run like use stickers and you get the topic and they can provide or contribute ideas and you select anything.
There's many different kinds of activities that you can run. It really depends on the outcome and who's actually going to be in attendance. Because in a large corporation, you're going to have multiple different levels of seniority. You could have a graduate in attendance, an executive director, and head of product. Where does that person stand in relation? There's all kinds of power dynamics to deal with. And discussion needs to be facilitated in a way that flattens that hierarchy as much as possible so that everybody's opinions get heard in the same way. It's not as, let's say, in an architecture firm, if you're a registered architect, your word carries a lot more weight because of whatever reason, right? You're trying to get as much representation as possible. Everybody is going to have a valid opinion about something, and they're all going to have their own perspective on a problem that you might not have heard of and someone more senior might not have heard of, and it all needs to be taken into account.
How about this conflict of interest? If in some degrees, someone did the opinion and the other person don't disagree, how you, as a service designer, how you present this report without excavating the conflict, or if there is any.
That's part of all of the meetings that you're meant to have, is in an ideal world, which doesn't always happen, in an ideal world, the best job a service designer can do is to convince all of the stakeholders that the solution we're going to deliver, it was their idea.
Oh, well, I get what you mean.
Yeah.
That's
ideal. And look, I have friends who are very good at doing that. I wouldn't say I'm that good at doing it. I'm probably not so good at doing that. But some people are really good at doing that.
this philosophy never changed since I think 3,000 years ago. It's always the key make decision. This make the feeling environment and everything. Oh, that's real service design.
You basically try and play puppet master.
So I think that's something like people can start thinking about. Whichever industry, it's about the stakeholder feel like they make the decision and you can really design that path.
It's the easiest path forward because if they're on board with what you're trying to do, then they won't put up barriers. Yeah. So if you can do that really effectively, man, you'll be a good service designer. But I was only an average service designer.
Very humble. Do you think any points or bulletin you want to add for this sector, or will you move to the next one?
I didn't really answer 3.4 or 3.5. Do you want me to go over those?
If you conduct user research, co-design, what you focus on during this? I think it's softly touched as working intensive. I think it was mentioning you work over time. What's this? The income level. Let's go ahead, please.
So I'll go through user research and stuff in a bit more detail. That in an ideal world, I would love to do that every week, constantly, always on activity, just because unlike the built environment where your finished product is a landscape or a building, which is it's built and then it's done and then you don't touch it for the next 30 years, except for maintenance. The output that we do, that we have, is constantly evolving. So if you think about, let's say it gets an app that sits on your phone constant
Yeah.
updates, constant improvements. And that happens partially because it can happen a lot faster than building something new, but B, just because the teams behind that are constantly learning from what their users are thinking of doing and reacting to. Let's say people are really struggling to find a certain button. Maybe we need to move that button, right? And where would be the best place to move that button? And learning that enables you to keep something fresh and up to date and to be able to satisfy your customers. And the feedback cycle is a lot faster. That would be ideal. And I've worked with teams that have been able to keep up that level of pace with research and chatting to customers. That's been fantastic. Other times, unfortunately, for budgetary restrictions or whatever, you might not get to do very much of that. You might have to think of ways to do it cheaply. And that might involve what's called guerrilla testing, which is just going out on the street and asking people, hey, I have a quick question. What do you think about this? And then that's their answer. Quick, move on to the next person and just try and get as many people as you can. And the only cost is your time rather than anything else. In terms of the focus of those activities, it's just listening. It's trying to find out what you don't know or prove a hypothesis or disprove a hypothesis. That's basically it. In terms of work intensity, I guess it really depends who you work for and what you're doing. In a corporate gig is pretty chill, I'll be honest. You don't often work overtime. In fact, they probably actively discourage overtime. I know I used to get locked out of my building after 7 p.m., I'm pretty sure. And look, there's pros and cons to that, right? Because being too chill and you don't have a sense of urgency. And that in and of itself is also a problem. But that's also very different if you worked in an agency, say, which will be, there's a very different set of incentives attached to working in a place like that. Chances are you'll be working harder, longer, less pay, but much larger variety of projects. So you pick and choose what it is that, which kind of path you want to take. And then obviously also there's people who are independent contractors, whether that means they consult individually or there's like extra hands for a company. They jump into a new office for 6 months because they needed a body. And then after 6 months is up, they go on to the next place. And friends who do that, and it's a perfectly viable, quite lucrative way to make money being a service designer or a product designer. So in terms of the income level, way better than the built environment. But unfortunately, in the built environment, in the development industry, you kind of make money either as a lawyer or as a developer, but not as an architect, a planner, or an urban designer or a landscape architect. That's just facts. I'll go with service design first, then I'll go with product design. As a service designer, if you were to join a consultancy, you'd be looking nowadays, if you're listening to this, we're recording in early Feb 2025, just for reference. If you were a mid-level, so just beyond a grad, you do 110, 120. And then if you're a senior, you're looking at a little bit more than that, 130, 140. And then if you're in a corporate, senior could go up to 160, 170, plus super on top of that. And then it goes up from there. However, that said, a lot of people have tried to make this transition over the years, especially into UX and product design. The consequence of that is those wages start collapsing as a result because there's more and more talent available. So I'll just put an asterisk against that. If you joined a startup, obviously the pay is going to be a lot less, but you're taking the shot at joining a startup that, hey, it's going to become something big and it'll be worth a lot more and they'll make a lot more money. So that's the trade-off, I guess. It depends which kind of ship you want to board.
I think this definitely answered so many people's question because in the same time, I think a lot of industry designer, I think people graduate from design related industry, not only build environment, are all talking about this topic all the time, especially UX UI is already overpopulated. Like you say, the income still within that range, let's say 2025 February, a lot of people still want to try because it's equivalent of like for 2025, I think architecture firms principal's income as a senior income in corporate, and it can be a regional manager's income equivalent. It's but you are doing technical and it's not time to work from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Because when you are principal of a regional area, it's not only about design, it's all about expectation management from 36 degrees. So yeah, I think that's why a lot of people end up moving. So really sharp insight.
One thing I'll
Mm.
caution as well
Yep.
is that's the wages now. On top of the supply of new designers coming into the market aspect, there's also the AI aspect that you guys want to think about as well, right?
Mhm.
A big chunk of product design work, and product designers might shoot me for this, but I think it's true. A big chunk of what gets done in the product design world can be abstracted by AI. The part that can't is all the human to human relationship driven negotiating, all of that. That still can't. But if you don't have those skills, then the actual work that you do, I think that value can disappear relatively quickly. If you think about it from a development industry perspective, right? Who's the lowest paid person is the draftsman. If you are stuck being the tech equivalent of a draftsman, where you're just making pretty pictures without the relationship management and all of that attached to the work that needs to be done, it's the same deal. It's you won't get rewarded for that. Financial reward is what you're chasing.
Thank you for your sincere advice, Sean. And definitely some it's not a whipping horse or it's not a pigeonhole for some technical savvy to escape and jump into it. The students think about what's the core skill set that they need to harness before jump to another place, and the rest and piece for is awaiting people to call them provide tasks. It's totally different. Yeah. So when we move to the next sector, okay. So career growth and the industry trends. So what is the fastest way to grow in the service design field from your perspective? Some people may be interested in.
From my perspective, is like I said earlier, curiosity goes a long way. My partner hates this about me, I'm sure, but I basically can't look at something without trying to break down how it was made and why it was made a certain way. And whether that means a physical product, or if I go to a restaurant and try and understand how they're operating in a certain way, it's, how do I put this? Being able to look at things like that. If you were to try and build a portfolio of work, having had the experience, being able to look at things like that and to just go, oh, I went to this restaurant and they operated like this. And I tried to break it down why they're operating like this. And here's all the efficiencies they could have gained if they tried this and so on. It's easier to build a portfolio when you have that kind of mindset. And that's one thing that I've found people who have been landscape architects and urban designers, they do have an edge in this one aspect compared to other people who are transitioning, is that they know how to build portfolios. Making a portfolio is a skill. I didn't think of it before, but a lot of people who haven't had the background of doing this really struggle to make portfolios. I've mentored a lot of students who have made the transition from some other field into this space, and the ones who have done portfolios before, like their portfolios, real good. Fastest way to grow, and just meet as many people as you can. There aren't as many meetups now compared to before COVID, which is a bit of a shame. But generally speaking, the service design community is pretty friendly if you approach them on LinkedIn. But I'll add that a lot of people try and do this and that they don't actually have any specific ask of the person they're trying to meet. So think about what it is that you want to find out from a particular person and really target that. And please don't chat GPT it, because we can tell.
I totally understand. It's got a lot of coffee invitation through LinkedIn. But when you clicked into that person's profile, you don't see that person has curiosity or passion. Sometimes they just want to figure out if can get from a $4 coffee, they can get an interview from your company or from a friend of yours. So definitely not like a purpose of connecting. It's about, did you see that person? Did you read his or her profile, did you find something common or something you really had passion and start conversation? And especially now, people use AI to ask me questions. I don't know if you've seen that. For me, it's you getting a bigger mask and hide behind instead of just raise hand, say, where is mine piece of cake? It's definitely a good advice for everyone who wants to have a out of their industry connection. It's about knowing the other person and have real peace of mind to connect for
Absolutely.
sharing this. So about advices to new service designers and what would you like to suggest? I know you already mentioned a lot. What's especially for new grads or maybe people want to shift to the industry and you mentioned you coach a lot. What's the advice like apart from curiosity or can give about that?
Is this for someone who's already made the change or is thinking about making a change?
That's a good question. I would say if you don't mind providing two pieces of advice for them prospectively.
So for people who've already made the change, which I'm guessing is probably a smaller proportion of people who are going to be listening to this, meet people is the short answer. Meet people because sometime down the line, you might be lucky enough to find someone that you can call a mentor, and that in a genuine, personal, informal mentor role rather than some mentoring program that's matched you with somebody, right? And that person can become very valuable for you in a whole bunch of ways, especially if you're relatively early in your career. And the other piece of advice that I would give to this person as well is don't think of this as a career, as don't think of it as I need to do 2 years at this level, then I need to get promoted, and I need to do 3 years at that level. Just don't. All right. It's not going to be
Mm.
healthy for you. It's not going to be healthy for your work. Just focus on doing good work, and good work will take you a long way. For people who are thinking about transitioning, I'd encourage you to think about people a lot more than you currently do. So, Chenyi, we talked about this before about how we were designing sites and you were looking at DDA compliance and all of that. It's like, great, that ticks those boxes, but think about the people that are going to be using the thing that you're going to build. When you start looking at things from their perspective, I think you might find how you design and what you design changes quite dramatically. And at the end of the day, when you shift into this side of design, ultimately you're going to be designing for people, whether that's providing them a service or designing a product for them. Because whoever it is you're working for is going to be a business, and a business needs to have customers. If there's no customers, there's no business. So you need to design something to satisfy your customers. And your customers are going to be people. So think about what these people need, want, expect, think, say, do, and feel. And that might take a bigger mental shift than people realize, I think.
Thank you. This is really, I think, very frank and honest advice for those two kinds of people. And it's all about people-centric mindset. And for people who already enter, they can start planting the trees for mentorship and the harvest later, but not focusing on harvesting natural thing where you focus on the daily work, daily life.
Just
For sharing.
cultivate it, grow it,
Yeah.
and then one day it'll pay off.
Pay off the way it should be. Pay off the best way that you maybe not within your own framework or picture, but that's the best gift. Yeah. So maybe talk about some future stuff. What trends do you see shaping the future of service design? You mentioned the change of the industry. And how do you stay creative, passionate about design? I know you're shifting from this sector a bit, but you have to share a bit of your ideas.
Trends. I'll say there's things I want to happen, but it's not necessarily what's going to happen, nor where I think the world might be headed. So I actually think that there's probably going to be a little bit of a split in how things develop. There'll be one part of the world that goes, who gives a crap about service? We're just here to extract the most money as possible out of our customers. And there's some evidence that certain parts of the world are going that way. And then there's another part, the part that I hope comes to more fruition, is a world that is deeply rooted in interpersonal connection. It's the whole premise of the business that I'm trying to build at the moment is completely anti-AI relationship-based kind of business. And I hope that's something that pans out because I feel like through the use of social media and a bunch of other things, but social media being one main culprit, we've started to lose interpersonal connection quite a bit. It's made dealing person to person more challenging, and I hope we can solve that somehow. As for staying creative and passionate, I'd say this comes back to curiosity because if you're curious about stuff, there's a saying that goes, interested people are interesting. And if you don't quite get what that means, it's basically if a person it shows interest in something, whatever that thing is, they're automatically interesting because they've developed a passion for that thing. So stay curious because at the end of the day, all of this work that we do is about solving some kind of problem. And there are always problems to solve. If there are no problems to solve, we'd be out of a job. It's the short answer. And it's one of the gifts and curse of what we do is you're constantly solving problems, but you're constantly seeing problems. And if you're constantly seeing problems, well, there's always work to be done.
Oh, I get what you mean. The bigger circle, the bigger interface, bigger the project and your future and your passion. Growing the circle. I think maybe if we move to fifth and a bit of a repetition, we change opportunity work in the country. And it's more about personal chit chat, or you can just like I think we just like move to more conclusion wise and chit chat. So if there's an opportunity to work in another country or city specifically, will be and why?
That's a really interesting question. I have a few, and I don't know what the right or wrong answer to these things is. I'd be quite interested be really interested to visit China and see
Oh,
what working there is, but I don't know if I would like to work there, if that makes sense. Because I've never been to China and
mm,
I've only been to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong it's not like China. And I'm curious because I know that the Chinese technological ecosystem has developed very differently to how it has in the West. And I just want to go and experience that and see what it's like and see how people are served and think about product design in that context. But like I said, I don't know if I want to work there because I've heard bad stories about work culture. So maybe just go there for a week, try things out, and then come back. So that's one. And then another is maybe South America somewhere, just out of
okay.
curiosity because I've never been there. And
Oh,
yeah, I'd be really curious to see what professional life is like. Again, not for a long term, just go there, visit, try it out for a week, and then come back.
oh, that's interesting. To me, I feel like you really are adventurous. In the same time, keeping the safety framework, but you have curiosity to dig around for fast-paced developing countries and see how their day life is. Actually, I got few friends who end up working as some designers in Oppo and Vivo, which are one of the biggest two cell phone companies. They say actually don't really work overtime.
Mm.
As a whole huge company, they are actually the few of the gems that don't really work overtime. It's very interesting. And time
Yeah,
to
well,
show
I would be
with
keen to meet them and hear what their stories are like.
yeah, they say it's a lot of experiments as because one product once it's released, it's affecting so many people. So they've done lots of testing and it's pretty fun. What I get, well, I'm now using Oppo from China. The reason because if you charge 5 minutes, it provides you from 0 to 60% battery, which is crazy. And that's one of the server design. Like Chinese people always like talking and meeting, so they can have to work everywhere. So I found one of the big difference. The Samsung I have is not that quick. You, I think that's all about it. Or do you have any questions you want to ask me, or do you want to share any other stuff?
I guess a question for you
Yeah.
is, I don't know, for people who are not so familiar with what you're doing, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And what do you hope to get out of doing this?
Very good question. Thank you. So I've been in design industry for 10 years. I tried most of stuff that I could explore in design industry. And the same, I'm teaching in University of Melbourne. So I volunteering, coached hundreds of students graduating and follow up their lifestyle. and see them changing career or struggling. I get phone calls from people entering the third, fourth year of their career and telling me about they don't really like what they're doing. So they're all dancing with a skill that they don't really like. So I feel like, what about if you think you have a chance to use all your skill set and transition or have chance to transition to a place that really, so I want to build a bridge that connecting people who really go through the path in Australia. So which is maybe examples and show them what the role should really look like. Maybe it's not that ideal or it's not that harsh. It's what it is. So that's the point I'm starting this one.
I'm glad. You're doing good work, Kenny.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best with this series. Looking forward to seeing it or hearing it when it comes out, for sure.
Bye.
This is a placeholder for a multi-track sequence